evening, everyone. It's 9 o'clock, autonomousmedia.net, and it's Windows with a difference, and still without a title for the show. But that doesn't matter. The show will go on, and the information, I can assure you, will be good. Things have all a bit changed here. Hopefully, my sound level's looking like they're coming out okay, but I have got a little bit of feedback in my headphones, so you'll let me know in the chat if there's anything coming out that end. But Mark Windows is someone that was one of the first people that woke me up to what was going on in the world around me. And 6 years ago now, he was putting out information that I can look out of my window and go out my door now and see has come into fruition. Some people was calling that fear-mongering at the time or misinformation, but it's quite clearly out there. Agenda 21, Agenda 30 is happening. It's all around us, and the evidence is there to see. And Mark's delivery, the way that he put out his information in short and concise, often just factual manners, without I can quite say without any ego involved in his broadcasts, and just keeping it all factual was a great help to me on my journey, and I'll probably be always grateful to him for the work that he's done and continues to do. Most of that work goes largely unrecognised in terms of getting any payment back for it, but I know that he has got a lot of people supporting him on his Windows on the World website and on his YouTube channel, checking out his information, and keep encouraging him to put it out there. So over the last, I think, probably 18 months since I met Mark, maybe getting on for 2 years now, it was Joanne that introduced us, Joanne Summerscales from the ET Newsroom, as she now is. And over that time I've got to know Mark pretty well. I think we got on quite well, and I think we can call ourselves friends now. I think I'm happy saying that, and I think he's trusted me and I've trusted him, and I've got to know a different side of him that doesn't actually come out on those broadcasts that you're all used to seeing, a side that surprises many when I show them some of the other work that he does. And I thought it would be a good idea if we could get together and maybe show you some more of that side of Mark, and get him to ask some questions and go deeper into the roads of the events that he's covered and why he's covered them. So that's basically why we're here doing this show. And also on the back of the Ocelli Effect. Mark's been on a Wednesday night on the first hour of the Ocelli Effect for, I think it's 8 weeks now. And in that show he's produced some amazing information, some of which I've heard before from his shows, but he has expanded on it and putting it together in a nice, detailed, in a good story of chronology of how we actually got to this place that we're at now as a legal person, as a fictional dead entity lost at sea. And that as well has inspired this show, because I think Mark has got so much in him that doesn't get explored. Tavistock House, that's something we could probably do a whole show on one time soon, I think. And Chatham House as well is the other one, is it not? Sorry?
Yes, that's
Tavistock
right.
Chatham House.
Royal Institute of International Affairs, they all tie in, but it's these groups that come down through them, policy groups, government groups, think tanks like Demos, who are a particularly nasty brainwashing organisation. And for instance, we did a show called The Echo Chamber Effect, and it was about a paper that was produced by, well, you might as well say Tavistock, but it was produced by Demos, and it was all about trying to demonize people who use social media, who gravitate to their own groups, to their own echo chamber. This paper was produced, and within days all of these mainstream prostitutes, journalists they call themselves, and presenters were using echo chamber. LBC was one of the worst offenders, but it was obviously on Sky News and of course the BBC.
Yeah, LBC. My missus listens to them a lot. It's Well, it's pretty amazing what comes out of there. Again, we could do another show about that. And
well, there's several, there's several presenters on there that are pure Tavistock productions. Most of them, in fact. I mean, I don't really like Katie Hopkins. I don't agree with a lot of the stuff she says, but they kicked her off for something that was so trivial. And again, Farage, they don't use those terms, the echo chamber. They don't go into this program stuff. I don't know what the name of that Asian guy is, and I can't remember now, but there's him and James O'Brien. They're particularly nasty, programmed narrative controllers. And it's very difficult to work out whether these people are actually agents or whether they're just completely brainwashed. I think it's the latter, because a lot of this political correctness and complete mental enslavement is embodied by those two presenters. And there's obviously many more on there, but you know who's controlling the narrative when you find out. And this is the sort of stuff we expose. And what's interesting is that once you start putting this stuff out there, you'll find that certain groups will not speak to you. For instance, people like the Socialist Workers' Party, I'm not saying all of them won't speak to me, but I know that there's certain individuals within that group who will not speak to me because of the stuff I put out. But they don't try and denounce what I'm putting out. They just don't want to speak about it. So they're being mentally enslaved as well. We talked about this a bit earlier on, and something struck me that in order to counter what these people are doing, you have to think like they do, or try and think like they do, and have a strategy. The reason this stuff happens is because it's strategic. It's been worked out on many, many levels, and the psychological subversion and the fear-mongering involved is all incredibly well researched. It's been going on 100 years at least. Well, you can say it's been going on thousands of years, but we know that British military intelligence goes back really at least 100 years. And when you start looking at how people and groups are targeted, then you start to learn how this works. I've been targeted by these techniques, and what tends to happen, a friend of mine actually, she's got an independent venue, and she's been targeted with these type of techniques, these kind of the whispering campaigns, accusations that you spend all your time trying to counter, and general attacks and undermining, just very sinister stuff. And this is really how these intelligence services operate. So I think to me, this is the most important and liberating thing I've ever learned, is what techniques they're using. And then you don't get drawn into their techniques, because their techniques are meant to cause cognitive stress within you, and start to give you mental health problems. There's many people who that's happened to. And thank God I haven't been targeted extremely and excessively for long periods of time, but I certainly know how this stuff works. And it's very, very nasty. It's very psychological, and it's something that most people haven't got a clue is actually happening.
Yeah.
So if you try and talk about it, you'll come across as paranoid. Now, the intelligence services also use that to promote people who are mentally ill, to attack other people as proxies, and we know a bit about that as well. And I was watching some stuff we did at the People's Voice, a show I did with David Shaler just before the thing closed down. And of course, it's good to have him on, because whatever people think of David, and I don't go on opinion. I don't go on opinion of what anyone thinks. I only know my interactions with him. And of course, he did blow the whistle on this, which has affected things recently. It was something that came out that Salman Abedi, this terrorist from Manchester, his father was an MI6 asset, and he was involved in the attempted assassination of Gaddafi in '92, which took out some British military people. And it was Shaler that blew the whistle on that. So it's very interesting talking to somebody who's worked within the intelligence services. And he always quoted a book by Fletcher Prouty called My Trade is Treachery. And that's really what it is, because it doesn't matter whether these organisations are MI5 or whether they're people in your local council or change agent groups in local communities. they are all using the same intelligence tactics against you. And once you find out what these are, it disarms them. But the main thing is not to get drawn into it, which is why I think it's a very good thing not to get emotionally drawn into these attacks. The thing is, though, obviously, if they affect you directly, you're going to. That's absolutely natural. But what's been played out here is a game. It's a terror clown show, and people are victims of that. And it's a way of keeping you in. I don't want to sound new age here or anything like that, because this is not what I'm meaning, but it keeps you in a very, very low vibrational density, all this stuff, because it's perpetuating fear and negativity all the time. And interestingly, I mean, this is a bit of a diversion, but I was watching some of these sort of new punk bands, and most of them are totally nihilistic. It's kind of pointless. No one seems to enjoy themselves. They get drunk. There's a bit of aggression, but there's no joy. And that's kind of it's like another mind control trick, really, to me, because music is all about a kind of broadening. It's a broadening of your consciousness and a freedom to jump around and dance. But, what I saw last couple of days was just really, really negative,
Sad to hear that. I mean...
Yeah, it's just a shame, because this is young people, but it's not all like that. I mean, there's some brilliant stuff about, if you're going to talk about music, I mean, we're going right off topic here in a way, but we're keeping it generally within a kind of area. But, we look at things like rap music, why has that been going so strong for 30 years? It's because it was an intelligence operation to keep people into a certain mentality. And once that becomes your mentality, then that's it. You're trapped within it. These things are all traps. They're all traps into a certain paradigm. And unless you can have an overview, you can be very easily sucked into it all. And that's why youth movements have always been really important, because the youth are the people, they've got the energy, the enthusiasm, and the narrative has to be controlled. You can't have young people expressing themselves and then thinking that they're not going to join in with society. I mean, heaven forbid, what would happen if everyone dropped out of it like us,
Yeah, what would happen? Can we go to the pod? I think we're going to play this. You want to tell us a little bit about this now? We've got Fascist UK, Hope Not Hate, and it seems, from what I can make of it, because you did do a show on this a couple of weeks ago, that there seemed to be a lot of hate in a bid to get this hope, so there seems to be a bit of irony or controversy in what they're calling themselves here, these people. And,
well, what they are basically is attack dogs of the state, and they are hugely part of the Israel lobbyists who are infiltrated every party in the country. And you only have to go and have a look at The Lobby, which was a documentary, and then the recent one, which Al Jazeera put out, where you had Israeli agents openly stating that they could bring down people in the British government. So this tells you a lot about Hope Not Hate. Hope Not Hate was set up out of an organisation called Searchlight, and it seems to have come out of these anti-racist groups. And what they've done is they've basically become what they are actually meant to be fighting. They are, by their own definition, fascists, but these people don't really know what fascism is. They are terrorists, basically. They are acting as domestic terrorists. They can quite easily be described as that because they're using terrorist tactics. They're using violence. They knocked a 74-year-old peace activist to the ground, and they knocked a friend of mine's phone out of his hand. I wasn't at this particular, it was a meeting. They decided that because somebody had written a book discussing the Holocaust, that they would attend this meeting, which had nothing to do with that. So basically what they did is they incited hatred against an author who was giving a talk about the Westminster Bridge attack. And they got Antifa, which is another Soros-backed thing, along with themselves, Hope Not Hate down there, with coercing the RMT union in there as well, with big RMT flags, so it looks like a legitimate protest. And they basically sent thugs down, and these thugs were also saying that they were proud Zionists. This is all going to come out. We've got them on every single angle. So everything that they profess to be against, they are actually using against members of the public. And we're meant to be a democracy, which is a joke, of course. We're not, whatever that means. And these people are shutting down our rights of free speech. Now, it goes back to what we're talking about. Nobody has the right not to be offended if they're operating within the law. And these people are operating now outside the law. Hope Not Hate was funded by the public through the Joe Cox Memorial Fund, along with the mercenaries who call themselves White Helmets in Syria, who are actually killing the Syrian army, executing them in the streets. And they're working alongside ISIS and al-Nusra. And they are embedded with them. So the White Helmets are meant to be some kind of rescue group. So when, for instance, there's an assassination of a Syrian who may be a patriot or he may be a member of the Syrian army, then the White Helmets are right next to them. So they shoot somebody in the head, execute them. The White Helmets then come in with a stretcher and take the body away straight away. And you can see that all on YouTube on Vanessa Beatty's channel. I'm going to do a show about this, but this is the hypocrisy of these groups. They were funded by somebody who is meant to have been murdered, Joe Cox. We did a show about that, Joe Cox Murder and Propaganda. We also went down to Birstall to talk to people who may have been witnesses. There was huge resistance within the village, and there's a lot of fear around that subject. We can go into that some other time, but we didn't get any special information. But there is definitely an atmosphere of fear, and which has silenced people down there. And now this group are working alongside Antifa and Black Bloc, and of course these groups are heavily infiltrated as well. That's another thing, that they're infiltrated by so-called anarchist groups, and a lot of these anarchist groups are undercover police. We've already exposed that. We've exposed it years ago. When I started to find out how this stuff works, it's a joke. And we've talked about that, about people thinking they can protest, government organised protests. We've covered all this stuff. So this group are actually inciting hatred. What they're doing is finding fracture points within society. They haven't got the British National Party as their enemy anymore, so they go for people like Nigel Farage. Whatever people think of him, he's certainly not a hate monger. So he's a democratically elected politician. He's got a party that adhere to the rules according to the Electoral Commission. They are perfectly allowed to preach or promote whatever policies they wish to do, whereas Hope Not Hate are basically a terrorist organisation. So I'd urge people to look at those shows, because we're going to be doing more to expose these lot, because they are, to me, absolutely poisonous. All of this stuff comes through fear. I mean, what they're doing is actually they're redefining language. So, in other words, they're taking control of language. They're taking control of language to control your mind. So, in other words, if you don't agree with a certain global perspective which is being enforced upon us, then you're a hater. And it's very effective, this stuff, because when you have people shouting that in your face, or calling you a fascist and screaming in your face, it does tend to be quite intimidating. The first time I saw this was at Occupy. We made a film called Puppet Masters of Occupy, when we discovered it was funded by Soros, when we also found out that Climate Camp Action was a group set up by the police stroke intelligence services to steal the money of Occupy and to close down any protest outside Parliament, and indeed pretty much anywhere else. And it was the beginnings of the second big phase of the anti-terror legislation, which we've got now, post 9/11. And it's quite astounding that these people are that brainwashed. They don't appear to be able to think, because if they thought this through, I think they were quite embarrassed. And I'm going to put out more shows on this, Tony, because they need to be exposed, because this is at the heart of what we're trying to do. We're trying to get the truth out, and these people, by this indirect sabotage, are trying to stop it. And they are the enemy of the state. Depends what you call the state. If we take back possession of the state, then they are our enemies. I mean, the state works for us, we do not work for them. I mean, legally, they can argue that we do. But when it comes down to it, on a, what you could call, bigger picture, which would be what they would call a religious stroke spiritual level, that cannot happen for reasons that people who listen to some of the stuff we put out will know. What we were talking about on Chuck's show, about our incorporation and that we are not property. But these people are controlling the narrative in every part of life now. I found this with local authorities. You'll find it with people who are being empowered with diversity, political correctness, and it's being used against people's minds as soon as they are old enough to speak. So now we have this completely politically correct narrative, whereas if you say something to most people out there, they'll go, "Ooh, it sounds like a conspiracy theory." They'll use the programmed term that they've been given, and they won't analyze it, think about it. They will just use it as a blanket term, and that's what these people are doing. They're saying that anything that we say that they don't like is hate speak.
You're a denier, Mark.
Well, I'm a denier of things that cannot be proven. Because if things can be proven, then they cannot be denied. And this is the big problem that they have. Because what they do is they tie in Holocaust denial to climate change denial, and then they do the third thing. So they go, "Oh, so you probably think the Holocaust is a hoax. You probably think that anthropological global warming isn't happening. And you probably think that Elvis's brain is on the moon." This is the way they go with it. This is exactly the way they use it. So they use the threes, and the third one is to ridicule you. So basically they tie it all together. And once you know how this intelligence stuff works, it's very transparent. And the antidote to it is truth. Which of the facts are you denying? So you're a denier. You're denying facts. You're a fact denier. That's what they are.
Yes, and those that would call you a denier are also denying you your right to free speech. And they go on the tack. They cause a massive distraction with their allegations, their presumptions, and that stops people from focusing on what is right, because they start to focus on a different thing, which is who is right, and that isn't often the same thing in people's minds, because you got this mentality, unfortunately, with too many people, where once they've found something that's right with one person or one organisation or a few things, they start to think that it's all right, and they stop questioning other stuff that comes out of the mouths, and at that point is where we get some serious problems. So you get gangs like you do with football teams and all that. I've noticed this on the internet here. It's quite distressing how tribal people actually are, how they gang up and then they go on the attack. And it seems quite clear that Nick was just going about his lawful business in a peaceful way, and not only did he get attacked and everybody else there get attacked and categorised as things that they clearly aren't, and their freedom of speech was denied, but then the establishment itself seems to think that it can rob them of their money after denying them the right to go about their lawful business. It's quite a state of affairs, and this is all done by people using emotional arguments and emotional attacks and distracting you from the logic of the situation, and people fall in it over and over again.
Yeah, they're falling for mass hysteria. There was a gallery that was going to put on people that may have, say, far-right or extremist views, and have them actually in debate with people who didn't agree with them. And these talks were shut down by Antifa. And there's a guy stood outside this gallery that they smashed the window. These complete fools turned up with their faces covered. And there's one bloke standing there with a little sign, and you can see it on that video if you go to the YouTube. It's all over YouTube anyway, but it's on that video stroke podcast that you put out. And he's got a sign which simply says, "The right to openly discuss ideas must be defended." And there's a woman next to him with a sign pointing to him going, "Nazi scum," and they're all screaming at him that he's a Nazi. And he's not said anything. He's just holding a sign that says the right to openly discuss ideas must be defended. It's getting into the realms of surrealism here. And I think that's where the key to it is. It's so absurd that these tactics that are being used are very limited. They've worked for a very long time, and they work with a certain type of person. They work with the feeble-minded, and many people, it's sad to say, fall into that category, and it's not always their fault. It's the fault of what's gone in. It's the input that's at fault. They've taken an input and they've repeated it. And I had this with some people I met years ago. I started making fun of the EDL, the English Defence League. I said it's basically a Zionist-backed organisation to cause fracture points. And people got really angry with me. But those people are just being used. So if you point out to people that they might be being used, they hate you even more. That's the ironic thing.
Yeah, it's never ceased to amaze me how many people that are in the so-called truth business that really don't like the truth when it comes onto them, when you tell them something about them. And that's when they tend to stop listening, to take offence and go on the attack because they think that you've been on the attack. And that's kind of one of the things that we both share in common as well, is that we both understand that nobody has the right to be offended, but we all have the choice not to be offended, should we want to take that choice. And over the last few weeks or so, I seem to have offended quite a lot of people without intending to offend them, and that's made me go on and do a bit of research and a lot of thinking about taking offence, and that perspective. Was offence given or was offence taken? And it seems to me that taking offence and the victim culture that we hear a lot about, but we don't hear so much about the offence side of it, which to me is behind the victim culture. And I think we could have a pretty good discussion on this right now, because when people take offence, what they are doing is that they are imposing their own personal political correctness onto other people. And it's a major form of political correctness as well. It doesn't seem to have any boundaries. People can seem to take offence at anything that they like and try and restrict your conversation, your actions, your intent. And I'm getting pretty sick of it, to be honest with you. I'm getting pretty frustrated by how much it stands in the way of people making progress, how much it stands in the way of people sticking to their point and their actual objective. And they cause an incredible distraction by doing that. So.
Yes, it's a very important point, because what they're actually doing is disempowering themselves. By taking offence, you're disempowering yourself. Yeah. You're losing your ability to be open and see things. But it's quite interesting, actually, because I do offend people if I need to, or let's put it another way, I don't hold back on what I believe the truth to be. So I was talking to these women who, a few weeks ago, a friend of mine who runs a lot of festivals, and they were talking about a certain group that got together, and I said, well, that's about someone's ego, really. And they said, well, we've splintered off from that and we've started up something. And I said, well, you've got to be really careful initially, because if you've got something very strong, it will be taken over and infiltrated very, very quickly. And they thought I was being negative. Now, that is really interesting, isn't it? So this whole philosophy of this positive thinking is also a big trap, because There's no such thing as positive and negative thinking. There's just things that are facts or they're not facts. It's got nothing to do with being positive or negative. So if you're telling somebody that their group may be infiltrated, they go, oh, that's so negative. And this is how Occupy was taken over. You've got a lot of very enthusiastic people there, and a lot of people who knew a lot about the financial system, and some really, really strong, powerful intellects. And within a few weeks, the infiltrators had come in, got them all fighting against each other, and they took all the money and destroyed it and put it into general assemblies using Delphi technique, which is military intelligence developed by the Rand Corporation. Every single public meeting in this country is held with Delphi technique, and nobody seems to know what it is apart from a few people. I mean, your listeners might do. They're more educated in these things, but you say that to the average person on the street and they'll look at you as though you're from another planet. But these things are being used against them all the time. But that is a big problem, because there's a lot of people out there who think the truth is negative. Well, the truth is neither negative nor positive. It's just the truth. And if it can be proven by fact and it can't be disproven, then it stands. These are just basically, this is the golden rule of law. And that's why I find, to bring it down to something like that, you take the opinion away. It's not about opinion. I don't care about opinions. The late Michael Collins Piper used to say, I'm not here to win friends. I'm here to try and influence people. So by pointing out what he pointed out, he lost a lot of listeners and he ended up kind of obscure. But the things he was saying were absolutely correct. And you go back and listen to his shows, and he was kind of ahead of his time. Whereas the people who do get promoted and do find their way into the public eye are those who know how to sell themselves. And truth isn't about sales, it's about truth.
Yep, I agree there. It's getting all a bit silly, excuse me. I've got to have a little shift around. Right, so what do we do when someone says something to us that we see as criticising us? Should we react or should we respond in that situation? Well, I think if we react, then we're going with emotion, and if we respond, then we're going with logic and forethought. And I think to anybody that doesn't believe that political correctness is a good thing, and I don't believe that many of our listeners do, then you should think hard on taking offence and your perspective with it, and how you should respond and not react when somebody says something that's maybe for your benefit, should you actually respond to it properly. And this will help us think critically as well, which is another thing that we're vastly encouraged not to do, and think critically about ourselves, because there's no point in being critical about the rest of the world and all those that are running the world if you can't be critical about yourself. There's no point in trying to help everybody out there or anybody out there if you can't help yourself. So you don't realise the damage that you're doing to yourself. And I'm not speaking here as someone who thinks they're perfect. I've had real trouble with this taking offence business all my life. But I have identified it many, many years ago. And via the flotation tank, I had started addressing my problem. And I'm still not over and done with it by any means. By no means at all am I done with it. So, but this is where we need to get, as a collective, if you like. We need to be thinking critically, and we need to be doing that about ourselves, because I still believe what I've believed for many years, that we are the problem and we are the solution. And until we start thinking and acting properly, we're not going to be able to sort out the wood from the trees with any of these issues.
No, that's absolutely true. And a lot of it is about self-development. It's not about self-empowerment, it's about self-development, two very different things. So most people get those two mixed up. Yeah, they've been programmed into empowerment, and it's not about that. It's nothing to do with power. The power comes from your ability to see things from an open and neutral situation. And the meditational state is very good for that. A lot of people don't know about the stuff that I've studied with parapsychology and these experiences I've had, and I don't talk about it, and I think I want to talk about this stuff more because parapsychology is something that's been completely marginalized now. But all this stuff works if you tune into it. It's interesting that you can draw the right people to you by just being open. But you have to be wary because there is so much actual mental illness out there. This is another thing there's an astounding array of people who, because of the way society is and because of what's happened to them, and of course society, the way it is, functions better when people are disempowered, in the respect that they are mentally unstable. And a lot of people don't understand that, and that's a big part of it. And the New Age thing and all this stuff, this egotism that comes out of it, is a big part of that. And a lot of this stuff is well, if you go back to why was there a priest class? Why were there the Holy Kings? You know, why were these ancient cultures being kept in line by priests? It was basically because of the same thing as now, but these people knew a bit. They had experience. They knew a lot. And not everybody is going to do that. And especially when I look around now, people are so mentally lazy. It's unbelievable. They don't really, even in the truth movement, so-called, they will repeat things. They will be falling into the trap of the state all the time because they repeat things. They keep going, oh, it's a false flag, without really even knowing what that means. Because they seem to get, this is another thing, they seem to get things like false flag and hoax mixed up. They're two very different things. And you find all this stuff being put out and repeated. So basically, that's just another level of crap. You might as well read the Metro or the Evening Standard or watch Sky News if you're going to react like that. It's quite a difficult thing, but it's very refreshing when you meet people who do get it. And the encouraging thing is that more and more do, because the tactics of this intelligence operation that's being played out against us are limited. And this was my big revelation into it, with things like what were happening with local councils even, was that the tactics are limited. They're using military intelligence tactics: deny, disrupt, degrade, and deceive. And it doesn't matter whether it's MI5 doing it, or whether it's your local council, or whether it's someone in a pub next to you. You'll find that people will go into those. Their ad hominems are the biggest form of attack, and it's also the weakest argument.
I understand. You were saying in the pod that we listened to earlier, you was telling us about is it the 3 days or the 4 days?
4 days, yeah.
Yeah.
It came out of a slideshow. I mean, it's funny actually, Tony. I was watching a show I did with David Shaler the other night, and it was quite inspiring because it was when the people's voice was closing down. We were the only people there. There was a couple of people left, just helped us to operate the studio. But the whole thing was falling apart, and we'd been attacked by this website, and we were going into all this stuff from the 4Ds: deny, disrupt, degrade, and deceive. And I look at it now, and it's kind of exciting because we were coming face to face with this stuff, and there was a real sense of urgency about it. Now I don't feel that sense of kind of urgency because I'm surrounded with this stuff all the time. So it's a very interesting thing to go back and I'm going to put those videos out again. I'm going to put them up on this new channel, on Windows on the World channel, because with a bit of a preamble, because the information in them is invaluable, and the same people are still spouting the same crap, and people are still falling for it. So they say you can't fool all of the people all of the time. You can't. But you can fool most of the people most of the time. And that's the sad fact of it, because we live in a media-driven world. We don't live in an information world. We live in a media-driven world. And the two are very different.
Yeah, it's a programming device, obviously, and one of the things as well that I've found is how easy we are to program. And still, myself, even though I'm aware of many of the techniques, and I consider myself reasonably awake, I still get caught here and there by people's programming techniques. I still take things on board and repeat them without properly researching them and without doing my own work. And this is why I appreciate a bit of feedback from our chat room when I might be going down a wrong path or something like that, because I'm here on a learning path and a learning curve, and I'm at a certain stage of my journey which is going to be different to all of yours, and taking offence at something that I might say that you might disagree with because you know it not to be factual, or you just kind of don't agree with it for whatever reason, that's not the way to go. Let's have a debate and let's start talking, and leading by example is what I want to say from our chat room here at Autonomous Media. This is where I'm reaching out to at the minute, because we've had a little bit of discord lately, and it's these methods that stop that discord, and it's not addressing these methods that cause war at the highest levels. That's where it comes from people taking offence, and from people, just not thinking about things logically, and not getting tied up with all this emotion. So that's kind of a bit of a plea from me, having a few weeks of really, really hard work trying to make things work all around me in terms of technical equipment, websites, and keeping people together. It's been a bit chaotic, and I'd really like for some of people that might be listening to this to kind of think about this carefully.
Yeah, well, you're in it for the right reasons, Tony. I've got great admiration for what you do, because you're pretty selfless about it, and in a way so am I, because it's about the information. I just love putting information out, and I felt an urgency when I started doing this to put things out, and then I was attacked and marginalised, and I couldn't understand why, and then I knew who was doing it and why it was being done. So they're using these tactics. I found out who was doing it. It was people who, I would say now, the more gullible people in the so-called truth movement were following. And the problem is with this, if you see things clearly, straight away, then other people will go against you. And that's really how it works, because they're doing the job of the state, basically. The state has brainwashed them into certain beliefs, and if the right triggers and the right things are said to people, they will respond accordingly.
Yeah.
Sorry, Tom. Carry on.
No, that's good. I just wondered whether...
Turn that phone off, hang on.
Yeah, I'm getting some feedback. When I started in the radio business, I could see that there was some problems with people with really good information that were struggling to get that information out, and they weren't getting the sort of help that I felt that they should have got or could have got. And it just so happened that some of the skills that I've got could have helped in some ways with that. So my only original goal in doing any of this was to help those that give their time for free, that put all their research in, and often resources and money into getting information to people. My goal was to help those people do that, because not many of them understood the technologies that they were dealing with, the internet and that, and I've got some reasonable understanding of that. So what we're doing here is a culmination of I don't know how many thousands of hours work, because I'm learning as I go. Not only am I teaching people how to get their stuff out to more people, but they're teaching me all the things I need to know along the way, and that's a nice combination for me. But at no point do I feel that I've ever made this about me. I've always wanted to keep it about people's information and reach, improve the reach of that information. And I don't favour any particular host or any particular show I just work with people as I can to do what I can to make their thing better, and take it as it comes. And I think that we do have potential here to build a platform and a resource that could be used by a lot more people that are trying to do the same thing, and without having influence by those that would call themselves their bosses or owners or anything, you know. People can just get their information out as it comes, autonomously, hence the title, you know.
Absolutely,
We've got no advertisers or anything like that, so I will put out a bit of an appeal here. Take the time for anyone that's listening to this that thinks they might make a good radio host or radio presenter or a producer, anyone with technical skills that would like to help out in honour, then come along and give us a shout on autonomousmedia.net. Get into the chat room there and make contact with someone, and we'll have a chat and see how we get on, because we've got a massive uphill struggle in so many different areas, but those different areas all seem to be connected to one thing to me, and there seems to be massive distractions into those little micro elements, and all the meantime the macro is unaddressed, and I think we need some good plans to deal with the macro and concentrate on that some more.
I think it's about, as well, individual responsibility. You can work collectively, but you have to do your individual work yourself, and that's why I like groups that aren't affiliated to anything, because they cannot then be labelled or taken over. So I think that's an important thing. That group we're talking about, 9/11 Keep Talking, it's a small group that it's been incredibly infiltrated and subverted and had so much trouble over the years, because they're a group who are individual thinkers who are collectively able to tolerate each other and have many, many common goals. And they're very analytical. So in a way, they are a threat to the state, because they are people who would have been the pillars of society. And now they're the pillars of a new society, or pillars of their own society. And this is really interesting. You know, I met somebody yesterday who was very far down the line of what I'm talking about, knew exactly what it is, and was going, oh, God, you know about that? Oh, right. And just the frustration of seeing things taken over, controlled into the broader agenda. And the reaction really to it all, I suppose, is to be competent and take responsibility for your own actions. Otherwise, that you're going to be compromised. So you have to be. There's a lot of work has to go on with this, but I don't think it's about groups of people. I think it's about individual responsibility. To me, anyway.
Well, yes, it is to me. That's what I said earlier. We're the problem and we're the solution with all of this. And it pains me that it can be so hard to have a logical conversation with people that don't get out of control. And I'll be working on my own side of that anyway, because I've got improvement to make there. There's no doubt about that. I want to talk a little bit about one of the pods that I saw on Windows on the World that you pointed out after one of our chats to me. It's a fella that I didn't know anything about, or I didn't think I did, but after watching the video, I had these flashback memories when I was a kid, I always used to flick through the Daily Express that was on the work surface before I went to school. I had an interest in what was going on in there, and I seem to have this flashback memory of something about this case. And I'm talking about Ernst Zundel, who was controlled, or they attempted to control his freedom of speech out in Canada, way back in the early 80s, wasn't it, I think?
Yeah, there was 2 court cases, and he'd produced a leaflet that he distributed in Canada. He was a German. And the leaflet simply asked a question. And it stated, did 6 million really die? Talking about the extermination, or alleged extermination in Germany. And a court case was brought by the Anti-Defamation League B'nai B'rith. B'nai B'rith is basically a Jewish Masonic brotherhood, and they have a spin-off called the ADL, which is now run by this guy called Abe Foxman. So what they do is they go out looking for anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is a big industry, and it's a huge psychological tool against people, and it's a big part of political correctness. And Zionist Jews will always openly admit that they use it against non-Jews. So it's basically psychological warfare. And he had a court case and he had a very, very good barrister called Doug Christie. And Doug Christie brought in expert witnesses. And he sent a fellow called Fred Leuchter out to Auschwitz to get some samples of the walls of the alleged gas chambers. And Leuchter was an advisor to the American government on death by cyanide, basically executions by cyanide. And of course, gas chambers have to be hermetically sealed. Death by cyanide is a very slow process, which is why it's not really used anymore, because you have to be in a even if you're in a completely sealed container, airtight container, and they pump the cyanide in, which is highly explosive and a very unstable gas, that it would take up to 45 minutes to die in a sealed container. And he went up there and he couldn't believe it, because he believed the whole story, and he was so in shock with what he saw that he just came back and told the truth. And he was hounded for years and years, lost his job, and Zundel eventually went to prison. It's really worth watching it, the Ernst Zundel trial. And he was simply asking a question. But what was very interesting about the case was that the opposition were losing. And it was not on evidence that he was shut down and put away. It was because of the power of the judicial system and the people who were running Canada. So it's a very interesting documentary to watch. And his house was firebombed. Terrorists, basically, which is the beginnings of what we were talking about with Hope Not Hate. They're using terrorist tactics against civilians who are just expressing their right to free speech. Now, we know we haven't got the right to free speech in this country. We haven't got that at all. Political correctness completely handicaps most conversations. There's very few people who can get beyond it.
Yeah.
So that is really worth looking at, the Zundel trial. It's quite inspiring as well when you see a man as honest as Doug Christie, who's one of the most honest and capable barristers you could ever come across, and a really honest man who did lots of human rights work. And when you get somebody that honest, people can see the honesty in him. And this is the problem they had. So they tried to do all the railroading, all the rest of it. Even Raoul Hilberg was brought in, who's the big expert on the so-called extermination camps. And Christie very calmly asked him if he could produce evidence of one death by cyanide or carbon monoxide, just one record anywhere. And Hilberg left the stand and said, "I'm at a loss," and walked off. So I think people should draw their own conclusions from it and look at that. But a big part of political correctness is shutting down. That's one of the biggest forms of censorship. What other historical narrative are you not allowed to question?
Yeah,
the genocide was not allowed to question.
It's should open up a lot of people's minds. Just the facts that are easy to check on where this conversation has been limited to the point where you can actually go to jail now if you've discovered some evidence and facts and mention them. You can be discredited, you can be attacked, and you can be sent to jail for divulging that information, which is a pretty shocking place to be in, isn't it?
Well, it is, and that's probably the biggest example of it, but it goes into everything else.
Yeah.
And we're in a. I was saying on Chuck's show the other night, according to the British Psychological Association, we're in a post-truth world. So that tells you really what's going on. That the psychological subversion is absolute. And the only way to counter it is to stop buying into it. It's very difficult because you're handicapped in a lot of areas. There's a lot of things you can't say unless you're within a group of people who are relating to it. But you can bring people into it slowly. I think that the sort of what they'd call the white middle classes have been the biggest victims of it, because you don't really get it in what they used to call the lower classes, and you don't really get it. You get it to a certain point with multiculturalism, but when you're talking about most groups, the people who are most attacked by their own country are their own citizens, and we have to question that. So who are our government working for? And after looking into it, it's pretty clear who they're working for. They're being lobbied by another country, a state, which we set up, which we're not allowed to question. And that is a big part of the problem that we've got. And it's a pretty horrific one as well, because the things that are happening to people and the tactics that are used against people. I know people who have been really, really traumatized by this stuff. I put myself out there because I'd had a background in entertainment. We might do a mad comedy show. That's how I got into all this. Because I was able to get up and do talks. It didn't bother me. I just used that as a skill. So when I started with Land of the Free, we were doing some really good stuff. And this is a slight side issue, but a chap got in touch with me who challenged the council tax, and we're going to do an interview next week. And he said he was inspired by the film that we put out, Council's Courts and Conmen video, which is also known as Free Man Standing in Court. But yeah, I mean, it's how effective, it's about how effective you are. And there has to be a very solid base. And I think that's what I've tried to create. So if anybody goes to look at the Winners on the World stuff, and there's anything in there that they think's incorrect, just tell me, because as far as I know, the stuff we put out is correct. We only use hearsay when we have to. Most of the stuff is sourced, and I'm very lucky to have a good access to people who do know what they're talking about, because there's many, many who don't.
Certainly there is. I'd like to explore quite a lot of different roads with you. We're going to kind of chill out a bit, hopefully, over the coming weeks, and take some questions off of people, and maybe start to lead a debate more along the lines of what we've been talking about here. And I know that we've got some people that don't agree with some of the things that we do and some of the things on the show, And I personally would like to get some on as well and have them here chatting about what they don't agree with, and let's see if we can't get to the bottom of some things and come up with some facts to get it all right between us. Ernst Zundel, getting back to that, I explored quite a few more of the videos about that fella, and I'm totally blown away with his commitment to his right to free speech, and his example to us all. But the martyrdom, if you like, albeit totally unwilling, is just, I don't know, how many years did he spend in jail? It was a lot of years that he spent in. 7.
I think he was in for 7 years, yeah.
Yeah, that's incredible. For making a statement, and that statement, it was later proved to be...
It wasn't a statement, Tony. It was a question.
A question. Well, that question, was later proved that 6 million didn't actually die in those circumstances.
The Arrelson figures, this is another thing, Tony, that I wanted to bring up. This is a very, very important. I posted the Arrelson documents on Facebook, and then I'm getting people calling me a Nazi, a fascist, and I actually had one person, who maybe I shouldn't name, who was quite a famous punk from the 70s, reported me to Facebook for ethnic and racial hatred, for posting the official figures of the death tolls in concentration camps. And that's insanity. That's the definition of insanity. We're dealing with people who are insane.
Yeah,
these Antifa thugs and all these people, they are insane.
Yeah,
because they've lost their minds.
Well, they've turned it on their head. They'll call you a denier, but they're the denier. That you're putting facts in front of them, and they're denying those facts. So
they're facts deniers. Yeah, deniers of the truth. Yeah, I know. It's just incredible. I mean, well, a friend of mine, I was in a band with 30 years ago. He said, I've had these people sending me messages saying that I'm friends with a fascist, and it's you. We were in the pub, and I said, "What? Why would anyone say that?" And he says, "I don't know, but I'm meeting him on Thursday, and I'll let you know." Well, they were going round because I posted. I didn't even think about it. It was just something that's in the public domain. These are figures that the Red Cross used to calculate how many people died in concentration camps, which were pretty accurate, because at the time, obviously, the Soviets were controlling it all, but there is good records available, and that's hate speech. So the truth is hate speech. So the facts are hate speech. So there's a schizophrenic thing going on here, which is definitely not in the public interest. It's not in the interest of anybody. In fact, it's poisonous. And it's making the world a much, much worse place than it should be.
Yes.
Because it's actually allowing very, very bad things to happen. And it's being used as a weapon to take people's power away when they're telling the truth. And it works on many, many levels. This is where the whole thing about conspiracy theories and Elvis is on the moon, and this is the techniques they use. I'm quite aware of it all now. It all really comes out of British military intelligence, but it's very tied in with the Mossad and Israeli intelligence. They're all the same thing. They're using the same tactics. Once you know the truth about this stuff, it's stark. It's not particularly pleasant. It's definitely not all love and light. And it's psychological warfare. And once you're able to get beyond it and see it for what it is, have an overview. You need an overview with this stuff. You can't get involved in it too much because it is insane. It's mental illness, really. But it's mental illness that's been inflicted on people, and it's their choice. It's up to them whether they absorb it, really. And that is part of the black magic of it all, because you're consenting to it. You're allowing it to happen. And The only way it can be stopped is for you to stop consenting, stop being politically correct, stop worrying about what anyone's thinking. I've observed people who were classed as slightly mentally unhinged. And this is a really good point, I think, because I was always attracted to people who just didn't care. In fact, I think find people so-called sociopaths quite funny, because they'll go in somewhere and they'll really say to somebody what everyone else is thinking but can't say. And I always thought that was incredibly funny. And those people are called unhinged. But basically, they usually come out with a lot of truth. It's a high comedy. And I've known quite a few people who were involved in comedy and entertainment who are like that. And it can be a very debilitating thing for them in a politically correct society. But people who can't hold back and can only say what comes from their heart or what really is the truth, those are two different things. But it's something that we're not allowed to do, and that's clear when you come across that kind of behaviour.
Yeah, for sure. Something you were saying earlier about the British government being controlled by that state that we can't mention, otherwise we get categorised as something nasty.
Yes.
Right? Did Theresa May or May not? She did actually sign some new legislation about anti-Semitism. Did she not recently?
Yes, I did a rebuttal of that, because the people in the Law Society would say it's not going to fly. And there was a lady called Alison Chablow who we had on the show, and she, in my opinion, and I think it's a fact, is that she was very confrontational with some songs she wrote about alleged survivors of the Holocaust. And they were satirical, but they were quite aggressive. So they would be more likely to lose people than win friends if they were outside that particular view. And it's now been stated that this case that was brought against her for a song called Survivors, about alleged survivors of the camps, Auschwitz, etc., where she debunked what they were saying. And these people have already been debunked anyway. It's in the public domain. So this group called the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, which is basically goes looking for anti-Semitism everywhere they can, because that's their business. They brought a private prosecution against her, but it was taken over by the CPS, and now it looks as though it's been watered down. Because I would have thought if there's a problem with the Malicious Telecommunications Act by putting a video on YouTube, which she did, was that initially the video would have to be removed until it was deemed to be either offensive or not offensive, but the video stayed up, which was very confusing. So I think the whole thing's falling apart. But get back to this. It was a response to this new definition of anti-Semitism. Wait a minute. Let's get onto the website, because I just want to give the name of the document. It's quite worth looking at, actually, because I did a legal rebuttal of it all, just to see if anything came back, and of course it hasn't, because it can't be done. Israel's Agents UK, a lawful response, it's called, and that has point by points, which need to be rebutted. There's an article called Lawful Response to Israel's Propaganda Agents, and I've now picked up the video. There's the article. Yeah. So, yeah, Theresa May did adopt this, and it's been adopted in 21 other countries, I believe. But whether it's enforceable here is questionable, because when it goes into things like the high courts, they're going to have a big problem here. And that's what lawyers were saying. They were saying that because it was so loosely worded, and it was really down to opinion, and you can't really have opinion in law, when you can't really have opinion in truth. Either something is offensive or it isn't.